You are watching Inside the Americas. Thanks for joining us. Here's a look at what's coming up in today's show. As Colombia gets set to go to the polls, we'll meet some ex-FARC guerrillas running for Congress for the very first time. The media went crazy this week over soccer star Neymar and his surgery in his native Brazil. But many there are wishing the focus was more on the deplorable state of the country's health system. And Donald Trump promises controversial new tariffs on steel and aluminum, what he says America needs to get a fair deal. I'm Jeannie Godula. First, the elections in Colombia are fast approaching, and for the first time ever, the vote Sunday will see members of ex-guerrilla movement FARC run for Congress. FARC fought the government for over 50 years in a conflict that left more than 260,000 dead. But a peace deal 2 years ago helped turn the FARC into a political party that now has dozens of former fighters running for office. Owen Barnell reports.
Here in Monteloro, former FARC rebels have come to this mountain village to seek out votes among victims of the war they fought in for decades. Though campaigning is never easy for an old Marxist guerrilla fighter.
It's very difficult. I can tell you that I'm almost convinced that it was easier to make war than to make peace. Colombia is a very reactionary country.
Pablo Catatumbo battled against Colombia's armed forces as far back as 1973. Now, his former enemies ensure his safety. Catatumbo is escorted through an ascent of Monteloro and Santa Lucia. He is here to campaign ahead of the historic elections on March 11th, when FARC former guerrillas will enter parliament.
This government gave them a political way out. That is, to turn bullets into votes. It is nice because it gives them the will to stay calm and to not think about going back to war.
2016's historic peace agreement between FARC and Colombia's government was initially rejected by Colombians. It was then revised by President Juan Manuel Santos and signed into law. The deal guarantees FARC 10 seats in each election up until 2026, regardless of the number of votes it receives. FARC will stand in the March 11 ballot and hope to win even more, yet these rebels have a steep hill to climb. The guerrillas are infamous for kidnappings and bombings, and many Colombians think they should be in prison, not pushing for public office. Several of their campaign events have been disrupted by protesters. FARC's transition to an electoral force was never going to be simple, yet this week's election day will provide an early sign of if it has staying power.
Well, there were a lot of sad Parisian football fans this week as PSG got shut out of Europe's top club competition, the Champions League. Some say the loss was due to the absence of star player Neymar, who watched the game from his home country of Brazil, where he's recovering from surgery for a broken toe. But the media frenzy over Neymar's stay in an ultra-modern clinic has got many Brazilians angry. The attention's focused on the wrong place. For just across the street sits a decrepit maternity hospital that, like most state-run facilities in Brazil, is short on staff and all kinds of equipment, even beds.
A football star with a broken foot. Neymar's injury won the interests of the world's press. Facing up to 3 months out of action and plunging the chances of Brazil's World Cup success into doubt, the 26-year-old was flown to his native country for surgery. Eagerly awaiting his arrival outside the Mater Dei hospital in Belo Horizonte were devoted fans and paparazzi.
God willing, Neymar will have an excellent surgery and recovery. He's special and the Brazilian team really needs him. We're counting on him. We're here to give him all of our support.
A looming building, complete with tinted glass walls and a helipad on the roof. It was a hospital fit for the world's most expensive football player. A stark contrast awaits the patients visiting the maternity ward just across the road. Its crumbling walls and broken windows are a sign of the state of things inside. Staff shortages and a lack of beds and equipment mean women and newborn babies sometimes have to sleep on stretchers. For people outside the ward, the hubbub surrounding Neymar should be focused elsewhere.
The media coverage was a bit exaggerated, to focus so much on him. We need to focus instead on the issue of healthcare in Brazil, which is in a big crisis.
We're suffering so much. Violence, robberies every day. public schools, poor standards of teaching, corruption. So all of that has to be given some attention too.
Brazil has one of the highest murder rates in the world and is just starting to heave itself out of a 2-year-long recession, which has left 12 million people unemployed. Despite making major strides in its efforts to raise millions out of poverty, the gap between the rich and the poor remains wide. Discharged after a successful surgery, a private jet flew Neymar to his coastal mansion for recovery. A luxury the women and babies leaving this maternity ward can scarcely dream of.
Next now to the United States, where the revolving door at the Trump administration spun again this week. The turnover of Trump's staff has been higher than any White House in decades. The latest departure was White House top economic advisor Gary Cohn. He quit after Trump threatened new trade tariffs on imports of aluminum and steel. Well, that promise from the president came as the latest round of NAFTA talks wrapped up in Mexico City. Trump has long been a critic of NAFTA, calling it a very bad deal. Now he's vowed Canada and Mexico won't be exempt from any new steel tariffs without a, quote, fair trade deal for the U.S. Catherine Viette reports.
Lots of talk, but little substance as the 7th round of NAFTA negotiations wrapped up on Monday.
In spite of this hard work, we have not made the progress that many had hoped in this round. We have closed out only 3 additional chapters: good regulatory practices, administration and publication, and sanitary and phytosanitary measures.
Overshadowing the latest negotiations, Donald Trump's threat to raise tariffs on steel and aluminum imports. During an anti-NAFTA tweet storm, the U.S. president vowed tariffs on steel and aluminum will only come off if a new and fair NAFTA agreement is signed. Mexico and Canada had been hoping for an exemption, but Trump has rejected that possibility.
No, we're not backing down. There will be tariffs on steel for Canada and for Mexico.
Both Mexico and Canada have called the proposed tariffs unacceptable and vowed retaliatory measures.
Should restrictions be imposed on Canadian steel and aluminum products, Canada will take appropriate, responsive measures to defend our trade interests and our workers.
Canada is the United States' #1 source of both imported steel and aluminum, while Mexico is also a major steel supplier.
Next to Honduras, where 2 years ago this week, environmental activist Berta Cáceres was killed for taking a stance against the building of a hydraulic dam, a move that would have forced hundreds of indigenous people from their homes. And on March 2nd, the very day of the 2nd anniversary of her death, her alleged assassin was arrested. Julia Kim reports.
He was within a hair's breadth of escaping justice. This engineer was arrested at Honduras' San Pedro Sula airport, just as he was stepping onto a plane bound for the United States. But now he'll have to answer for his possible role in the death of environmental activist Berta Cáceres.
This person is accused of having planned the death of the activist. At the time, he was president of the company Desarrollos Energéticos, or DESA.
Over 2 years ago, the firm wanted to construct a hydraulic dam on the river Gualcarque, a project that threatened the expulsion of hundreds of indigenous people from the Lenca group. Berta Cáceres was one of them. For years, she campaigned against the construction of the dam, enduring intimidation and death threats. In 2015, she won the prestigious Goldman Prize for her work defending the environment. The 44-year-old's murder on the 2nd of March 2016 sparked huge protests across the nation. 8 people were arrested in the months that followed. They were employees of DESA, members of the police, and even of the army. But those who ordered Cáceres' assassination remained at large until the 2nd of March 2018, exactly 2 years to the day she was killed. For the activist's family, there's no doubt the man arrested last week is involved in her death.
Of course there's something there. There's enough proof for this lowlife to rot in prison for orchestrating the murder of our sister.
The assassination of Berta Cáceres is far from an isolated case in Honduras, one of the most violent countries in the world, particularly for environmental activists. According to Amnesty International, more than 120 of its members were killed there since 2010.
We'll leave you now with our number of the week, and it's a good one for Mexican filmmakers. This week, Guillermo del Toro won the Best Director Oscar for his aquatic fairy tale, The Shape of Water. The film won 4 Academy Awards, including Best Picture. Del Toro was also the 4th Mexican to win Best Director in the past 5 years, following success by Alfonso Cuarón and a double win by Alejandro Iñárritu. Mexican success even reached out to the Best Animated Film Oscar this year. That went to the Day of the Dead feature, Coco. We'll leave you with that. Thanks so much for watching Inside the Americas. We'll see you next week for all the news from north to south.
Across Africa, presented by Georgia Calvin-Smith.
From North to South Africa, from Bamako to Nairobi, from Accra to Mogadishu. Bringing you all the political, economic, cultural and social news from Africa for a better insight into an ever-changing continent.
Across Africa on France 24 and France24.com.